Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Over the past few weeks I've been covering all of the different class changes arriving to the patch 11.1 currently available for testing on the PTR. So far I've covered the majority of all the different class changes, all but one, my current main, the class of Rogue. I wanted to give rogues as much time on PTR as possible to hopefully see if they get even more additional changes, as it started with very minimal adjustments heading into Season 2 on the PTR realms. And now I guess is the time to rip off the band-aid, take a look at everything coming new to rogues to find out if this class is cooked or undercooked heading forward into this brand new seasonal update. As always, if you guys want to get more regular updates when it comes to class changes for the patch 11.1, which will hopefully see additional adjustments over the next few weeks, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So I try to hold off on one of my favorite classes, my all-time main right now for the War Within, for as long as possible in hopes that Blizzard will give us some more changes for 11.1, but the longer I wait, the less likely it looks. So I might as well take a look at everything coming to the class of Rogue, which unlike every other class, which was a fairly lengthy video with a lot of little details, Rogues don't have a lot of new stuff coming out. And this is what I was really hoping we didn't see this time around, because it seems like we're going through a pattern yet again. This happened a lot on Dragonflight, where rogues get set up in a decent spot, and then we had a patch where we got nothing and we felt like we fell behind. Then we got an update that gave us actually a bit of a refresher to put us more in a competitive field, and then back down to nothing. So while other classes have seen smaller adjustments, little improvements, even very minor changes, but still some tuning and movement from patch to patch, season to season, rogues sometimes go from a moment of absolute just the best changes ever to just sleeping, to then back to some of the best banger changes ever, and then back to being asleep. And it looks like we are back to hibernating at 11.1. Now, let's go over everything that is new so far. So, CC, crowd control abilities are being reevaluated a little bit, with abilities like Blind and Gouge for rogues being reworked to, instead of breaking on immediate damage, damage now may break the effect. There is a limit, there is a threshold of how much damage it takes before you can actually break a effect like a Blind or a Gouge, which is pretty good. And it looks like they have a completely different animation. All of these things are very, very new looking. But you can see him auto-attacking, landing hits, and it's not breaking blind immediately. This is massive. This is going to be huge for both PvE content, but maybe a little, maybe moments where you need to crowd control someone and damage, breaking it. Like, you don't want to break the damage, you don't want to break the CC. Maybe an ally lands an auto-attack or a dot. That dot or an auto-attack may not immediately break the blind, so that'll be good for PvE content, where this will be amazing in PvP, because this gives you more of an opportunity to lock and load that specific crowd control with less of a chance that an ally will accidentally break it when they didn't mean to. This is a huge buff in that department, and that it is for all kinds of crowd control for all kinds of classes. So this is just one of those nice changes that'll be great for PvP. Aside of this, we also got some hero spec adjustments, very, very minor, specifically with Trickster and its capstone of Coup de Grace. So the way that Trickster works, if you're not super familiar with it, the playstyle, am I missing backstab? But as you use abilities, you put up a debuff on the target called Phase, and after you do that 4 times, every time you apply Phase to a target, you build for a Coup de Grace, which is your capstone ability. And after 4 stacks of Coup de Grace, you then transform your big finisher ability, for Subtlety Rogue being your Eviscerate, into this new empowered version of Eviscerate that deals a bunch of damage, has a bunch of cool new animation things to it, but they've adjusted it a little bit. And previously, this ability would have some kind of this like charge element to it, like you could use it from a distance against a target and would rush the rogue towards the target performing this animation. Pretty neat, but it created some situations in PvE content where you didn't mean to press Eviscerate because you're not used to Eviscerate charging you to a target. Normally it's a strictly melee ability, but that random charge could sometimes put you in the fire or in danger where you didn't really mean to. So they're removing that charge component completely, and now you have to use the ability in melee. It no longer has a charge component while still maintaining all of his damage. So this just creates a little bit more consistency for this ability. This is generally seen as a good change, because no longer you have this ability that forces you to displace your character, forces the character to charge towards the targets when you didn't mean to, which is super, super annoying, and it's a good thing that they are adjusting that specifically. Aside of this though, I'm gonna go over all of the different new stuff when it comes to rogues based on spec, and there's not a lot to talk about for subtlety and assassination really. We do have a bit to talk about outlaw, but I will still cover everything that is new. For assassination, talent-wise, there's actually not a lot of changes. The only thing assassination gets that's new is the tier set bonus. So rogues, being a melee class, all play around the playstyle of winning streak, as you use abilities against the target, whether it is your basic combat abilities, auto attacks, other proc effects. All of those can proc you the effect called winning streak. And winning streak does different things depending on the spec. For a spec like assassination, abilities have a chance to proc winning streak, which increases the damage of your envenoms, ruptures, crimson tempest by 3%, stack it up to 10 times. Envenom, Rupture, and Crimson Tempest all have a 15% chance to remove the buff of winning streak. So it's just a simple damage buff that builds over time, and as you use all of your abilities, it can do quite a decent bit of overall damage. Now, when you use abilities like Envenom, when you use abilities like your Rupture, all those have a chance to remove that winning streak buff. So you have a bit of an ebb and flow, like you sometimes gain winning streak and sometimes you'll lose winning streak because you use those abilities. But where it does get kind of interesting is within its force set, because usually most melee classes have a mechanic around every time you remove the set, you get some kind of a bonus. Though assassination looks like might be playing with a bit too much RNG, where the spec may feel more like an outlaw rogue than an assassination rogue. As your force set, when you would lose winning streak, you have a chance. We don't really know what this chance is, but every time you lose a winning streak, there's a chance for you to instead gain maximum stacks of winning streak for 4 seconds. So as an assassination rogue, you are encouraged to use Envenom, Crimson Tempest, and your Rupture as aggressively as possible in hopes that you can remove the chance for winning streak. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll get this empowered version of winning streak, like I'm trying to see if I can achieve it here. But as you can see, that chance is fairly low, so just having your Ruptures and Crimson Tempest doing 30% more damage, I mean, that's kind of good. I removed the bonus, but I didn't get my force set. So that is a problem. Sometimes you may be able to remove the bonus, and you may get a powerful force set, or sometimes you'll remove it and you get nothing for it. And that is my biggest problem with this tier set right now, where other classes have a dedicated bonus. They're encouraged to want to remove it through basic combat abilities, but most classes are encouraged to want to remove their bonuses as quickly as possible because they get a more powerful effect for it. Assassination, in a way, now has to play around this mechanic of RNG, where every time you use those abilities, you have a chance to remove it. You kind of don't want to because you'd rather maintain this like passive bonus, but every time you remove it, you either will get nothing out of it or potentially a big reward, which so far I haven't been able to achieve whatsoever. So it's hard to tell if the spec is going to be getting any new changes, but as of right now, it looks like it's probably going to be pretty static. The spec that is getting a few changes, however, is Outlaw Rogue, and this is more like changes on paper that are really good. I don't know how they'll, if you'll feel it in terms of gameplay, but on paper, these are very solid. Now, the spec of Outlaw is going through its changes with the Roll the Bones mechanic, and I feel like if you're new to Rogue, we should probably go over Roll the Bones really quickly. So, Outlaw Rogue play around the playstyle of Roll the Bones, where they could roll a dice of fate, providing them an assortment of various random buffs. And there's a bunch of different buffs that can be applied, like Skull and Crossbones that gives Sinister Strikes a extra chance to strike an additional time, which procs pistol shots and gives you more combo points and more damage. Or things like True Bearing, which enhances your cooldown reduction mechanics of the spec. So things like Adrenaline Rush, you're going to be able to get that quicker. Grappling Hook, you're going to be able to get that quicker. Vanishes for those crack shot windows and burst damage, you're going to be able to get all those things quicker. Generally all really good buffs. An Outlaw can roll a variety of different buffs, either as a 1 buff combo, a 2 buff combo, or a legendary 5 buff combo. And generally, the more buffs you can roll as an Outlaw Rogue, the better. We even pick up talents like Count the Odds, where our basic combo abilities like Ambush, Sinister Strike, Dispatch, all have a chance to grant us a buff that we don't already have, and the more buffs we can have in the moment, the better. So that's just generalized changes when it comes to Outlaw, or that is generalized base gameplay of Outlaw Rogue. And now we can talk a little bit about how some of these new talent changes and tier set changes impact the spec. The first change is to the buff of Sleight of Hand, because it changes the buff by quite a bit. So Sleight of Hand increases your chance of gaining additional matches, so basically more than one single buff of Roll the Bones every time you roll it. Normally it's increased by 12%, now it's increased by 20%. Normally, and this wasn't really explicit with the talent, but it will increase your chances of getting a 2 buff, but not your chances of increasing a 5 buff. But they changed it, so now this actually applies for its 5 buff and 2 buff together. This is going to be pretty big when it comes to the actual math and percentage chances for the Outlaw Rogue spec, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Because we also got to talk about a tier set also plays around winning streak. Damage and abilities have a chance to increase the damage of your dispatch by 6%, stack it up to 5 times. So as you use abilities, you have a chance just to get 5 stacks of winning streak. It's pretty good. Dispatch has a chance to remove this buff as well. There's also an extra component with Roll the Bones, as Roll the Bones now has a 40% increased chance of granting you bonus combo buffs outside of just one. And Roll the Bones also gives us additional stacks of winning streak for each buff that we get. So basically, the more buffs we get out of Roll the Bones, the stronger our dispatch is going to hit for. This is huge in terms of just overall damage convenience and value increases for the spec itself. So as I have 6 stacks and I Roll the Bones, you can get up to 8 stacks. So now my dispatch hits for 48% more damage, dispatch being a fairly sequential ability as part of my basic Outlaw Rogue gameplay. This force set that gives you more chances to get more buffs stacks together with the sleight of hand buff that also gives you even more chances to get more buffs. And the more buffs you have as Outlaw Rogue, the more damage you generally do. More directly now with the tier set, but also even before, all the buffs are just a damage amp for Outlaw in massive ways. Why this whole chances and stuff becomes important is when we do the math itself on like our chances to get a good set of buffs. Our chances to roll one buff have been drastically decreased. Previously you would have like maybe like, I don't know, close to 80% chance to roll a single buff, which isn't ideal. We want to roll more buffs every time we roll the bones. So now that chance of close to like 80% or 79% has been decreased down to 18. So we have a very small chance of just rolling a singular buff with Roll the Bones. Our chance to roll a 2 buff went from like 20% or 19% to 65% chance. So now we have more chances to roll 2 or more buffs. Where this becomes even better is when you roll that 5 buff godly combo, because that at some point got changed to be 2% chance to get it, so very low. Lots of RNG. You probably have better RNG to get some of the rare mounts from raid bosses than to roll a 5 buff every time you roll it, technically. But with this change, with the tier set and the talents, you now have a 17% chance to roll a 5 buff combo. So every time you roll the bones, there's a good chance you might just be able to roll 5 buffs more regularly. Which means, as Outlaw Rogues, normally we didn't really gamble that much with Roll the Bones, because once we got 2 buffs, we were happy with those and we stuck with those for as long as possible. Because there was a very high chance of us to roll a single buff, and that's not really all that valuable for us. But now, you probably do want to gamble a little bit more, as it amplifies your damage directly. Not only do you now have a way higher odds of getting more than 2 buff or more than 1 buff, so basically it's going to be a damage increase, but now rolling the bones also adds towards your tier set to further increase the damage of your dispatch by a considerable bit. I mean, just on a tooltip, dispatch looks like it's going to be doing 500,000 damage guaranteed, and that's not without accounting for all these different buffs like summarily dispatch that can further buff it as well. Plus, we also have talents such as your supercharge, where every time you roll the bones, your next 2 finishers act as if you consume more combo points, making them inherently stronger. So now we have a playstyle where we actively want to roll the bones as often as possible, not necessarily for the buffs that we get, but for the damage amps we get. Between the supercharger, between the damage amp from the force set for additional stacks of winning streak to buff our dispatch damage, now Outlaw Rogues can roll those buffs a lot more aggressively to get a lot more buffs to output additional damage. Instead of something that we are trying to be very skittish about and very careful with, now we can use it a lot more aggressively to dish out far more damage and to hopefully roll into better buffs, resulting in our abilities hitting a lot harder. Between the eyes, it's still gonna hit for a decent bit, but where we see improvements is in the dispatch, as it's able to keep up with between the eyes, even though it's like a weaker version with our crackshot setup. But this ability hits a lot harder, which basically just means we can use Roll the Bones a lot more aggressively as a damage primer. It means that we do care about what buffs we have, and maintaining really good buffs is gonna be important. But now it might be more important to just roll to amp up and use that damage amp instead. Like I said though, it's going to take a little bit of time for us to figure out what is the best way to use Roll the Bones, but possibly going forward, you may use Roll the Bones to prime your abilities instead of rolling the bones to get certain buffs to fish for. Which means that you're someone who hates the RNG of Outlaw Rogue, you may actually enjoy this new upcoming playstyle a lot more, as the focus is more on just delivering as much damage as possible, less worry about what buff that you have, because you have winning streak, you have yourself the supercharger, so there's all these little components that actually might have the spec play in a very specific direction. Finally, we have the spec of subtlety, which isn't getting a lot of new stuff like assassination. It's mostly getting some new tier set adjustments. Their tier set also being winning streak plays kinda similarly to Assassination, but in a probably much better way. As you use abilities, you have a chance to build winning streak, which buffs the damage of your Eviscerate, Secret Technique, and Black Powder by 3%, stacking up to 10 times, so potentially 30% more damage on your finishers, which is excellent. Eviscerate, Secret Technique, and Black Powder all have a 50% chance to remove winning streak buff. The fourth set is where it gets a little more interesting. While Shadow Dance is active, you cannot lose winning streak buffs at all, and you gain an additional stack of winning streak every time you were to gain it, allowing you to quickly build up to maximum 10 stacks of winning streak, increasing the damage of your Eviscerate, Black Powder, and Secret Technique by 30%, which is kind of massive. Also, while Shadow Dance is active, you can't lose it, so you have a guaranteed burst window, and each time you were to gain a stack, you also deal additional 6% shadow damage per stack of winning streak. So you're getting about, what, a 30% damage window with these abilities, but you're also getting, during dance, 60% shadow damage during the buff as well. It doesn't actually show up as a proper buff right now, but based on the tier set, it does say you deal additional 6% shadow damage per stack of winning streak. The interesting part is Subtlety actually has a couple of components that allow you to deal additional shadow damage and may actually possibly lean Subtlety in a very specific build types. In fact, I have it in spades, from your Shadow Blades, which gives you 20% additional shadow damage from your common point building abilities. You can just from Backstab into Gloomblade, which is pure shadow damage, building common points, bypassing enemy's armor completely. You have things such as Flagellation, which is a stack buff that you apply usually with your Shadow Blades to give yourself more mastery, but also lash at the target for additional shadow damage. You have things like Deep with Daggers, where Eviscerate and Black Powder will further increase your shadow damage dealt by 8%. Also, Eviscerate and Black Powder deal additional 30% damage as pure shadow damage to targets with your Find Weakness active. So as long as you have that buff active against the target and you hit them with a Dance Eviscerate, that Eviscerate shadow damage does increase by a decent bit. So you can see the physical damage of Eviscerate hit for about 470 without any buffs included, and the shadow damage almost doubled it. It almost mashed it completely, which is a significant damage gain during that Shadow Dance window. Then we have things such as your Gormo's Bite, which is a talent on a 45-second cooldown that deals pure shadow damage, potentially can be played in the future. Things like Dark Brew modifies your attacks as to deal nature damage or bleed damage, or anything that does poison damage or bleed like Rupture all becomes shadow damage instead. So possibly you could make some kind of like a poisoner build where your poison weapon damage can be further increased by virulent poisons from auto attacks. And then you also have the entirety of the Deathstalker talent tree, which deals plague damage. Plague damage is a combination of nature and shadow, so anything about shadow damage also buffs plague. And Deathstalker has it in spades. Whenever they have Deathstalker's mark, that could deal additional plague damage to the target from applications of the actual Deathstalker's mark. You have your auto attacks that deal plague damage. Phantom Knives could deal additional plague damage with Clear the Witness. Fatal Intent Execute mechanic has plague damage. Ruptures can deal additional plague damage on top of the damage that they do. Whenever you AoE the target with your mark, will take additional 5% plague damage from all AoE output, and you can even further increase the damage of Shadow after using Shadow Blades for 30 seconds. So you have a lot of little components that could potentially angle you towards this shadowy playstyle, really emphasizing that build completely. And it's still hard to tell exactly which of these talents that deal additional shadow damage will end up making the play, but there's at least some kind of like a build possibility. But also there's a guarantee with the set. Unlike Assassination, which has complete origin with the first set, Subtlety can at least lock in that buff, whatever they have with this winning streak, and then get more chances for you to gain stacks of winning streak during dances, which means the dance windows are going to be massive for the spec still. So all in all, as Subtlety, while you're not really getting a lot of new stuff when it comes to your talent trees, you do have a tier set that may potentially have you lean into very specific builds, allowing the spec to deliver some of the best burst damage out there, with a big focus on shadow damage that absolutely pierces enemies' armor completely. And it's at least the tier set that matches the energy that Subtlety gives off of this bursty plan out spec that's all about planning your cooldowns, planning your burst windows, and it gives you the damage to boot. Whereas Assassination gets a lot more OG, so I'm actually a lot more excited about this spec than I am about Subtlety, or Assassination, at least as of this moment. As always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate that. Also, join our Discord community where we go over all the newest changes regarding patch stuff and 11.1 and anything new that's available over on the PTR realms pretty regularly. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.